Before we dive into this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It all began on a beachside villa, the type of location one dreams of for a perfect getaway. My wife and I had been married for 2 years, and this was our first major family vacation. My wife's mother, Susan, had meticulously planned the entire trip, always going out of her way to make sure the family had a good time, but something seemed off this time. Susan, my incredible mother-in-law, was in her early 50s, but you'd never know it. She was in great shape, always took care of herself, and had this vibrant energy about her. I'd always respected her, but during this trip, I couldn't help but notice how she looked at me. First, I shrugged it off. After all, she was my wife's mom, right? There was no way. She could be thinking anything inappropriate, but the looks lingered, and I found myself thinking about them more than I probably should. On the second day of the trip, my wife went out for some shopping with her sister, leaving me and Susan alone at the villa. It was a sunny afternoon, and Susan suggested we go for a swim in the private pool behind the house. I figured it would be a good way to cool off, so I agreed. I didn't think much of it at first, after all, we were family. But when she came out to the pool in a bikini that showed off her toned body, I couldn't help but stare for just a moment longer than I should have. She caught me looking, and she smiled. Swim in the private pool behind the house. I figured it'd be a great way to cool off, so I agreed. I didn't think much of it at first, after all, we were family. But when she came out to the pool in a bikini that showed off her toned body, I couldn't help but stare for just a moment longer than I should have. She caught me looking, but she didn't say anything, just smiled as she slipped into the water. I shook it off, trying to act normal as I joined her in the pool for a while. Everything seemed fine. We swam, talked about the trip, and laughed like nothing was out of the ordinary. But then, as we sat on the edge of the pool, I noticed how close she had moved to me. It had been a while since I'd been able to relax like this, so when she spoke, her voice was soft but full of something I couldn't ignore. Her hand rested on my arm, the touch was light but lingered, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I couldn't move, afraid to make things weird, but I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine as her eyes locked with mine in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced at her, trying to gauge the situation, but all she did was smile. The tension between us was palpable, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't figure out what to do. My mother-in-law was involved, and I was confused. Your kindness for my daughter has been overwhelming, and I felt a weird, uncontrollable sensation creeping down my arm as if someone were playing a trick on me. I should have got up and distanced myself, but I couldn't. Susan continued, her voice now barely above a whisper. I always knew she was lucky to have you, but I didn't realize just how lucky until I could process what she meant by that. She leaned in even closer, her lips brushing against my ear as she spoke. I could feel her breath on my skin, and my entire body tensed up. She was crossing a line, and I was excited to see where it would lead. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. I knew it was a line, but the way she was touching me, the way she was talking, it was messing with my head in the best way. I should have stopped her, I should have stood up and walked away, but instead I stayed right there, letting her hand slide up my arm, her touch growing more confident with every passing second. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I loved it. And I could feel the heat rising between us both from the sun and from the tension building in the air. Then, without warning, Susan's hand moved to my chest, her fingers trailing down slowly as she turned to face me fully. I met her gaze, and there was no mistaking what was happening now. Her eyes were dark, filled with something I hadn't seen before, something that made it impossible for me to look away. Does she know how good you are with your hands? She asked, her voice low, almost teasing. The double meaning wasn't lost on me, but I couldn't find the words to respond. I just stared at her, my mind spinning. And then she lightly brushed his hand along my arm. I glanced over at her, and she nodded reassuringly. Her eyes were bright with excitement. Touch was pleasant, and soon she was sitting on my lap, her hand gently sliding up my shoulder. Kisses began softly, as if she were testing the waters to see how I would react. I should have pulled away or stopped it in its tracks, but I kissed her back. I don't know why, maybe it was the heat of the moment or the shock of it all, but I allowed myself to be the center of attention. The sensation was electric. I felt alive and desired like I hadn't felt in years. As her kisses grew more passionate, her hand continued to move up my shoulder. There was no villa, no family, no vacation, just her and me caught in this moment that felt like it had spiraled totally out of control. Her kiss intensified, and I could feel her body moving against mine, making it impossible to think about anything else. Then reality hit me like a truck. The water lapped around us, but all I could feel was her body pressing against mine, the heat of her skin, and the way her fingers tangled in my hair. It was overwhelming. I staggered backward, gasping for breath, trying to clear my brain while Susan gazed at me. I was kissing my wife's mother-in-law, and it was so wrong. I still hadn't stopped. Her breaths came in irregular patterns, but she didn't seem astonished. Instead, she appeared composed, as if she had anticipated this the whole time. I can't, I stutter, and I push her off. My mind was racing, and I couldn't believe what had just transpired as I slowly rose to my feet, with water flowing from my body. Susan remained seated on the pool's edge, her gaze fixed on me as I emerged from the water, snatching a towel to shield myself. "You didn't exactly stop me, did you?" she whispered in a calm voice. I was at a loss for words, but she was correct. I hadn't resisted her advances or kissed her back, and now I knew I couldn't undo that. I also knew I couldn't allow things to escalate any further, so I decided to leave. I whispered something under my breath and turned to leave before anything else could happen. As I walked away, I could feel her intense gaze on me. Part of me wondered what she was thinking, but I couldn't handle it at the moment. I needed space to process what had just happened and figure out how to prevent this from destroying my life. The remainder of our vacation was a blur. Whenever I was in Susan's company, the tension hung heavy like an unspoken secret. She didn't say anything, but her expressions, the way she occasionally brushed her hand against mine, made it clear that she hadn't forgotten what had happened at the pool. I attempted to act normally, especially around my wife, but it was difficult. Every time I glanced at her, a wave of guilt would wash over me. I was alone in the kitchen when Susan found me. She stared at me with her familiar knowing grin and said, "We'll keep this between us." Finally, she whispered, "But if you ever want to resume what we began, you are aware of my whereabouts." As she left, my heart pounded and I nodded in response. As my wife and I got into the vehicle, I looked back at the villa, and the recollection of Susan's incident flooded back. My thoughts were still swirling around the incident, and I knew it would follow me even if I didn't do anything about it. Part of me wanted to let it go, but I couldn't help but notice how things had changed on the way home. Twisting roads felt endless, and with each turn I was reminded of the reality we were leaving behind. My wife, whose enthusiasm was contagious, chatted excitedly about the trip's highlights, the sunsets we'd witnessed, the places we'd visited, and the family dinners that had strengthened our bond. I nodded in agreement, but my thoughts were elsewhere. The discussion seemed ethereal, even dreamlike. I couldn't shake the burden of the last day at the villa. It was like a ghost that wouldn't go away. Susan's low whisper as she said goodbye colored all else we did together. She had added, "Keep this between us, but I am always here if you ever want to finish what we began." As we drove along the same roads heading home, it became abundantly evident that the holiday had made an unforgettable impression, even if I had attempted to ignore those statements and concentrate on the routine parts of our journey back. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Once a haven of tranquility and escape, the villa now held the secrets and unspoken longings of its inhabitants. The return home was strangely depressing. The familiarity and safety of our place, which is often a refuge, seemed stifling. As I unloaded the car, I could feel the weight of the vacation memories pressing down on me. Even the familiar things, like the stack of letters by the door and the cozy blankets on the couch, now seemed tainted by what had transpired. My wife, on the other hand, was eager to resume our routine and dive back into the rhythm of everyday life. She busied herself with unpacking and organizing her energy, which was a stark contrast to my introspection. I offered to help, but my movements felt mechanical, and my thoughts constantly drifted back to Susan. It was as if the vacation had split my life into two halves, the before and the after. In the days that followed, I struggled with a profound sense of disconnection in our interaction. Every time we crossed paths, there was an unsaid recognition, a quiet understanding that we were both involved in the secret we shared, and I found myself avoiding discussions about the trip while sidestepping any mention of her. As for Susan, she kept her distance politely. Our formerly casual and comfortable conversations suddenly had an air of formality. It was evident that neither of us wanted to bring up the matter, but there was a noticeable underlying tension. The formerly easy companionship between us seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a wary respect. Months passed and life returned to its usual rhythm, but the vacation had an enduring impact. I became more self-reflective, thinking about my decisions and the direction my life had taken. The events of that week had made me face parts of myself that I had previously repressed, and the weight of secrecy was heavy. I had always taken great pride in being forthright and honest with people, but now I was keeping a secret that was both thrilling and crushing. It was an odd contradiction. On the one hand, the excitement of what had happened between Susan and me was irresistibly alluring, but on the other, it felt like a violation of the honesty and trust that I cherished in my relationships. My reasons for wanting anything started to fade. My relationship with my wife, although still strong, now had an undercurrent of unease, and the vacation had catalyzed some self-reflection that made me reevaluate my needs and boundaries. What had prompted me to cross that line? Was it just a slip in judgment, or was there something more profound at work? I started to wonder if the vacation had changed anything fundamental about our bond. It wasn't that I didn't love her. It was just that I was struggling to accept the fact that our relationship had been tested in ways I hadn't expected. As I dug deeper into how the vacation had affected my identity, I realized that it had changed my perspective on intimacy and desire. I went on a journey that changed my perception of myself. The vacation had shown me a more daring, reckless side of myself. As time went on, I began to face these revelations head-on. Seeking clarity and perspective, I sought out therapy sessions. It was during these sessions that I started to understand the intricacies of my emotions and actions. I had to face my weaknesses and desires throughout the holiday, which was a time of great personal investigation. We had always communicated effectively, but our relationship had become more complicated after our trip, so I made an effort to address the underlying concerns. The process of reestablishing the trust and understanding that had been challenged ultimately required me to make an effort to be more open and honest about my emotions, even when doing so was painful. The vacation was more than a series of events. It was a watershed moment in my life. Looking back, I could see how my decisions and aspirations had shaped my path. The lessons I learned about the intricacies of human desire and the weight of our deeds were crystal clear in my mind throughout that week. Looking back on the trip, I viewed it as more than simply a chapter in my life. It was a catalyst for development and self-discovery. The villa, which had previously been a haven of escape, had become a symbol of transformation, a reminder that the most profound changes often emerge from inside. Although the secret we shared with Susan will forever be etched into my memory, I came to realize that what mattered for my future were the decisions I made going ahead. I had received on my trip. As I returned to my routine, I took the lessons I had gained from that life-altering event with me, hoping they would lead me to a more honest and satisfying path. It wasn't just about the villa or the secrets it held. It was about the journey of self-discovery it sparked. It was a reminder that life's most profound lessons often come from the unexpected, and that the true measure of growth lies in how we navigate the complexities of our desires and choices. The unspoken words, memories, and the villa all contributed to a deeper understanding of myself and my relationships. The echoes of the past would always linger, but I was determined to use them as a foundation for personal growth and a more authentic life.